Bhagavad Gita, the Song of God. Commentary by Swami Mukundananda. Dedication. This elucidation of the Bhagavad Gita is dedicated to my beloved spiritual master, Jagat Guru Shri Kripaluji Maharaj, who is illuminating humankind with the purest rays of divine knowledge. He is immersed in the divine love, bliss of Bhagavān, and is lovingly engaged in inundating the entire planet with it. This commentary on the Bhagavad Gita has been written to fulfill his instructions to me to preach the knowledge of the Vedic scriptures in the Western world. I pray that by his blessings it will be helpful in guiding sincere seekers of the truth on the path of enlightenment. Swami Mukundananda. Introduction. Invocation. I first offer my respectful obeisances to my Gurudev Jagat Guru Shri Kripaluji Maharaj, and then to the Supreme Bhagavān Shri Krishna, while Shri Krishna embraces the pure-hearted. My Gurudev is so merciful that he offers shelter even to the spiritual destitute. This insignificant, inconsequential Atma, who goes by the name of Mukundananda in the world, is surrendering at the lotus feet of his spiritual master. With his Guru's permission, inspiration and grace, he is humbly going to elucidate on spiritual topics. I offer my respectful obeisances to Radharani, the Supreme Goddess and the bliss-giving power of Bhagavān. She is the purest of the gopis and embodies the bliss of Vrindavan. When will my eyes see the wonderful form of the Supreme Bhagavān, Shri Krishna, who appeared on this earth as the son of Nanda? He is adorned with a flower garland around his neck and the holy tilak mark on his forehead. He is the protector of virtuous people. O Bhagavān, as a baby, bird yearns for its mother, as a famished infant longs to suckle the mother's breast, and as a lover craves for the beloved, may my mind always long for your divine vision. The ascending and descending process of knowledge. There are two ways of acquiring knowledge. The first is the ascending process, in which we utilize our senses, mind and intellect to explore, discover and conclude about the nature of the truth. The second is the descending process, where we simply receive the knowledge from a proper source. The ascending process of gaining knowledge is inherently prone to defects, since our senses, mind and intellect are made from the material energy. They are imperfect and limited. As a result, we can never be completely sure about the accuracy and reliability of the knowledge we gain through them. As the pursuit of material science is based upon the ascending process, even the most acclaimed and undisputed scientific theories of the past are overthrown and superseded by newer ones. For example, the Greek concept of matter as consisting of indivisible atoms are invalidated by Rutherford when he demonstrated that atom consists of electrons, protons, neutrons and vast regions of empty space. Rutherford's theory was overthrown by the quantum theory, which stated that electrons and protons are not solid particles but vibrating patterns of energy with a dual particle wave nature. This makes us wonder whether what we believe to be true today will also be proven utterly incorrect after a few centuries. The other process of knowledge, the descending process, on the other hand, is completely devoid of such defects. When we receive knowledge from a perfect source, we can be assured that it is flawless. For example, if we wish to know who our father is, we do not conduct experiments. We simply ask our mother, as she is the authority on this piece of information. Likewise, in spiritual matters too, the descending process immediately gives us access to vast reservoirs of knowledge, which would have taken ages of self-efforts to unveil. The only criterion here is that the source from which we receive the knowledge must be infallible and trustworthy. The Vedas are one such source of knowledge. The Vedas are not the name of any book. They refer to the central knowledge of Bhagwan, which he manifests when he creates the world. In this cycle of creation, he first revealed them in the heart of the firstborn Brahma. These Vedas were passed on for thousands of years by oral tradition, from master to disciple, and hence another name for them is Shruti, knowledge received by hearing. They are also called Apurusheya, not created by any humans. For this reason, in Indian philosophy, the Vedas are considered the ultimate authority for validating any spiritual principle. The validity of any spiritual tenet, whether in the context of the past, present or future, must be established on the basis of the Vedas. To elaborate their meaning, many more scriptures have been written. These scriptures do not deviate from the authorities of the Vedas. Rather, they attempt to expand and explain the knowledge contained in them. Together, all these are termed Vedic scriptures. The Vedic scriptures are vast, but three of them have traditionally been called the Prasthantraya, the 3 points of commencement for understanding Vedic thought. These are the Upanishads, the Brahma Sutras, and the Bhagavad Gita. The Upanishads are the section of the Vedas that deal with philosophical knowledge and are considered the cream of the Vedas. On reading them, the German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer said, "There is no philosophy in the world as alleviating as that of the Upanishads. It has been the solace of my life, and it shall be the solace of my death." Paul Dossen, another German philosopher, expressed himself thus: "Eternal philosophical truth has seldom found a more striking and decisive expression than in the emancipating knowledge of the philosophy of the Upanishad." However, for a lay person, the Upanishads are difficult to fathom. The Brahma Sutra is a synopsis of the Upanishad. It was written by Vedas to provide the philosophical conclusion of Vedic knowledge. Thus, it is also called Vedanta, meaning the culmination of Vedic thought. Like the Upanishads, the Brahma Sutra is also hard to comprehend, and its conciseness often leads to ambiguity and subjective interpretation. The Bhagavad Gita is more accessible than the above two scriptures. It provides a comprehensive and easy to understand summary of the Vedic philosophy. Bhagavad means to Bhagwan and Gita means song. Hence, the Bhagavad Gita literally means Song of God. It is a dialogue that took place between the Supreme Bhagavān Shri Krishna and his devotee Arjun on the verge of the Mahabharata war. In the course of history, hundreds of theories in economics, psychology, sociology, philosophy, etc. were first propounded and then discarded as inaccurate or incomplete. These were all the products of ascending knowledge, and hence imperfect and subject to error. If the Bhagavad Gita were also the creation of a mortal and infinite intellect, with the passage of 50th century, it would have become outdated and irrelevant. However, the perennial wisdom of the Gita has continued to inspire famous thinkers even in modern times, such as Gandhi, Robert Oppenheimer, Carl Jung, Hermann Hesse, and Aldous Huxley, to name just a few, thus indicating its divine origin. Embedded in the Mahabharata, the Bhagavad Gita was originally compiled by Ved Vyas as a separate text. Later, when he wrote the Mahabharata, he embedded the Bhagavad Gita in it. The Mahabharata contains 100,000 verses and is therefore the largest poem in the world. It is 7 times bigger than the Iliad and Odyssey put together and 3 times bigger than the Bible. Along with the Ramayana, it is accorded the status of Itihas, meaning historical manuscript of India. Its stories and moral instructions have fashioned the fabric of Indian culture for thousands of years. The Mahabharata is divided into 18 sections. The Bhagavad Gita is set in the 6th section, which is called the Bheeshma Parv. It comprises 18 chapters of this section, beginning from chapter 25, continuing until chapter 42. Since the Bhagavad Gita encapsulates most of the important aspects of the knowledge of the Vedas, it is also called Gita Upanishad or the Gita Upanishad. It serves 2 important purposes as described below. It imparts Brahma Vidya. As humankind boldly marches forward, expanding its frontiers of knowledge, the realization is dawning that the more we discovered and learn, the more there is yet to be known. New sciences emerge every year, leading to the inevitable conclusion that the quest for comprehending the whole truth of creation is a never-ending endeavor. This makes one wonder if there is any one body or source of knowledge that can easily explain everything that exists. According to the Vedas, there is such a branch of knowledge, and that is the science of realizing the absolute truth. There is one absolute truth which has been referred to by many names such as Ishwar, Bhagwan, Lord, Yehova, Ahur Mazda, Allah Niranjan, Alak Niranjan, Shunya, Ikomakar, etc. All other truths have emanated from it and find their position in the scheme of things from it. Thus the Vedas state, one who comes to know the absolute truth attains knowledge of everything. The science of knowing the absolute truth is called Brahma Vidya. The purpose of the Bhagavad Gita above everything else, it is to impart Brahma Vidya, the science of Brahma realization. Knowledge that helps a person resolve immediate problems is one kind of enlightenment, while knowledge that dispels the root of ignorance to solve all problems in one strike is another kind of enlightenment. The Bhagavad Gita aims at the second kind of enlightenment by destroying the darkness of ignorance that has enveloped the Atma since endless lifetimes. Unable to deal with the immediate problem at hand, Arjun approached Shri Krishna for a palliative to overcome the anguish he was experiencing. Shri Krishna did not just advise him on his immediate problems, but digressed to give a profound discourse on the philosophy of life. Jagadguru Shri Kripaluji Maharaj. Swami Mukundanand. Dhritarashtra said, O Sanjay, after gathering on the holy field of Kurukshetra and desiring to fight, what did my sons and the sons of Pandu do? The Supreme Lord said, My dear Arjun, how has this delusion overcome you in this hour of peril? It is not benefiting an honorable person. It leads not to the higher abodes but to disgrace. Just as the embodied soul continually passes from childhood to youth to old age, similarly at the times of death, the soul passes into another body. The wise are not deluded by this. While contemplating on the objects of the senses, one develops attachment to them. Attachment leads to desire, and from desire arises anger. The blessed Lord said, O sinless one, the two paths leading to enlightenment were previously explained by me. The path of knowledge for those inclined towards contemplation, and the path of work for those inclined toward actions. The spiritually minded who eat food that is first offered in sacrifice are released from all kinds of sin. Others who cook food for their own enjoyment verily eat only sins. All living beings subsist on food, and food is produced by rains. Rains come from the performances of sacrifice, and sacrifice is produced by the performance of prescribed duties. The pleasures that arise from contact with the sense objects, though appearing as enjoyable to worldly-minded people, are verily a source of misery. O son of Kunti, such pleasures have a beginning and an end, and so the wise do not delight in them. Shutting out all thoughts of external enjoyment with the gaze fixed on the space between the eyebrows, equalizing the flow of the incoming and outgoing breath in the nostrils, and thus controlling the senses, mind and intellect, the sage who becomes free from desire and fear always lives in freedom. The Supreme Lord said, Behold, O Parth, my hundreds and thousands of wonderful forms of various space sizes and colors. O mighty armed Arjun, the material energy consists of three gunas, modes, sattva, goodness, rajas, passion, and tamas, ignorance. These modes bind the eternal soul to the perishable body. Persons in the modes of goodness prefer foods that promote the lifespan and increase virtue, strength, health, happiness and satisfaction. Foods that are too bitter, too sour, salty, very hot, pungent, dry and chillful are dear to persons in the mode of passion. Foods that are overcooked, stale, putrid, polluted and impure are dear to persons in the mode of ignorance. Ved Vyas, the author of Brahma Sutra, the Puranas, the Mahabharata, etc., was a descension of God and possessed clairvoyant powers. Thus he heard the conversation between Shri Krishna and Arjun. It teaches the practice of yoga. For any science to be useful, it must address two aspects, theory and practice. Even the best of theoretical knowledge is insufficient in itself to solve the problems of life, and if knowledge is not put into practice, it only serves the purpose of intellectual entertainment. The Bhagavad Gita is not content with providing a lofty philosophical understanding. It also describes clear-cut techniques for implementing its spiritual precepts for everyday life. These techniques of applying the science of spirituality in our lives are termed yoga. Hence, the Bhagavad Gita is also called Yoga Shastra, meaning the scripture that teaches the practice of yoga. Inexperienced spiritual practitioners often separate spirituality from temporal life. Some look on beatitude as something to be attained in the hereafter. But the Bhagavad Gita makes no such a distinction and aims at the consecration of every aspect of human life in this world itself. Thus, all its 18 chapters are designated as different types of yoga because they deal with methodologies for the application of spiritual knowledge to practical life. These chapters also describe various systems of yoga such as Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga and Bhakti Yoga. The settings of the Bhagavad Gita. Though the truth is one and eternal, in different ages it expresses itself in varied locales that impart their unique flavor to its presentation. The teaching of the Bhagavad Gita must therefore not be regarded merely in the light of a generalized philosophy or ethical doctrine. It is the practical application of ethics to human life in a specific situation of crisis that serve as its setting. Since its teachings are exceedingly profound, the Bhagavad Gita required an equally problematic and insurmountable crisis as its setting. Thus, in order to fully appreciate the value of its ideas, the historical flow of events that led to the speaking of the divine message to Arjun by Bhagwan Krishna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra must also be known. The setting in which the Bhagavad Gita was spoken was the onset of the Mahabharata, a colossal war that was about to begin between two sets of cousins, the Kauravas and the Pandavas. The Pandavas, Yudhishthir, Bhim, Arjun, Nakul and Sahadev were 5 noble brothers. Their father, King Pandu, had suffered an unfortunate death while his 5 sons were still very young. Pandu's throne had been usurped by his stepbrother Dhritarashtra, who was blind from birth. Dhritarashtra had 100 sons, called the Kauravas, the eldest of whom was Duryodhan. For years the Kauravas, led by Duryodhan, had victimized their cousins the Pandavas and governed over the kingdom of Hastinapur, which did not rightfully belong to them. The Kauravas embodied cruelty, injustice, vice, oppression and irreligion. On the other hand, the Pandavas were saintly and virtuous, the epitomes of morality, sacrifice, devotion and compassion. Most importantly, they were great devotees of the Supreme Bhagavān Shri Krishna. Due to the oppression meted out to them by the Kauravas, the miseries of the Pandavas had become so unbearable that a war between the two sides had become imminent. Realizing the unavoidability of the war, both sides had canvassed for support from the scores of kingdoms that littered the landscape of Bharat, India at that time. The two groups of cousins were so powerful that the war would impact the whole of Bharat. Thus, all the kings in the land were obliged to align themselves with one side or the other. As a part of the vigorous mobilization attempts, both Arjun and Duryodhan had reached Dwarka to request the help of Bhagwan Krishna. Being omniscient, Shri Krishna knew that they were coming to entreat with his help. He created a situation that set the didactical tone for the approaching battle. He posed to be sleeping in his chamber. Arjun entered the chamber and in a mood of humbleness sat by the side of Shri Krishna's feet, waiting for him to wake up. In the meantime, Duryodhana also arrived, and in his characteristic arrogance sat on a chair behind Shri Krishna's head. When Shri Krishna awoke, his eyes naturally fell first upon Arjun, and later he was made aware of the presence of Duryodhana as well. Both parties sought his assistance in the war. Since Arjun and Duryodhana were both Shri Krishna's cousins, he did not wish to be blamed of partiality, so he offered that to one side he would give his huge army of the kingdom of Dwarka, while to the other side he would himself remain, but without any weapons. Since Shri Krishna had seen Arjun first upon waking up, he gave the first choice to him. Arjun elected to have Shri Krishna on his side, though without weapons. He decided that if Bhagwan was with him, he could never lose. Duryodhana was pleased by Arjun's choice, for he believed solely in material strength based upon military might. The Supreme Bhagavān Shri Krishna thus became the charioteer of Arjun in the war. On the verge of the battle, huge armies had gathered on either side upon the battlefield of Kurukshetra. This was the impending war of Mahabharata, the great battle of India. The situation was extremely grave, as an era was about to self-destruct itself in internecine warfare. Just before the combat was about to begin, Arjun requested Bhagwan Krishna to pull his chariot between the two armies. On seeing the warriors who had arrayed themselves for combat, Arjun lost heart. In a fit of despondency, he threw down his bow and refused to fight. Arjun was a victim of moral paradox. On the one hand, he was facing persons who deserved his respect and veneration, such as his grandfather Bheeshma, his teacher Dronacharya, etc. On the other hand, his duty as a warrior was to fight the war of righteousness. Yet, no fruits of victory seemed to justify such a heinous act. It seemed like a dilemma without solution. Bewildered, demoralized, disappointed with life, and dejected with the events, Arjun surrendered to the Supreme Bhagavān and supplicated for guidance on what the proper course of action for him was. In the state of Arjun's moral confusion, Shri Krishna set out to enlighten him.